Hey everyone, welcome back to the Yossi Schmidt Show. Today we have an amazing guest, Kyle Seraphin. Kyle, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I am a American citizen first, I guess. I'm a father and I'm a husband. I've got three little kids and another one that's inbound in a couple days. And I am most notably known as a recovering FBI agent. I worked for the FBI from 2016 officially until April of 2023, although I would make the argument when they took my badge and my gun in April of 2022, it was all over for me. And I also was a veteran of the United States Air Force. I went in and became a paramedic, and I became an air traffic controller and a couple other things. I worked in sales before all that, and I worked in a hospital, and I've worked in an ambulance, and I've worked in emergency medicine for a little bit too. So I'm kind of a man who's been about a number of different trades. But most notably, right now, I host the Kyle Seraphin Show podcast, and I spend a lot of time talking about FBI malfeasance and sort of the danger of the intelligence community and the way that it is weaponized against the American public. So that's kind of my primary focus these days, as being a victim of that sort of administrative state that exists.
So let's go back. What inspired you to join the FBI?
It's a good question. I think I'm one of those ideological or idealistic patriot types. I guess I always have been. I thought about joining the military when I came out of high school. I was a swimmer and I was an athlete. And when I got out of high school, I didn't think there was really a good opportunity for me to go to a military academy, although I had offers to do that. And so I thought I was going to go do the classic thing, go have a fun college experience, which turned out to be probably a questionable decision on my part. I ended up in college for an extra year. So I skipped the military thing at that point, and I moved on. I went into life. I went into some sales jobs. I ran a restaurant, and I ended up working for a movie studio. And I always had this urge to do something that was not what everybody else around me was doing. I'm kind of a contrarian by nature, I think. And so I had this sense, how do you do something with your life if you're a man and you want to be bigger than an individual? And a lot of that involves joining a team that's willing to go out and do something that is somewhat selfless. And so I spent about a year in reflection and prayer. And during that time, I made this decision that I was going to enlist in the U.S. Air Force. And that was really the first step on the path to ending up in the FBI. The FBI was a logical conclusion that came out of that decision. So at 27 years old, I swore in and shipped out to basic training in San Antonio, joined the Air Force. I went through a bunch of rigorous training and a bunch of selection programs to do Air Force Special Operations. And unfortunately for me, none of those panned out. I actually spent all my time training, never operational, but never failed anything at the end of it all. I just sort of was sitting in this, what they call casual status, waiting for my last opportunity to go to Halo school and go out. And I thought I was going to go to a battlefield, but that didn't turn out to be the case. And as my wife has reminded me every day since we've gone public with our story, I really was preparing for a different battle. And that battle turns out to be more of a psychological battle that we are dealing with our federal government. So got out of the Air Force in 2012, went back to school, thought I might be doing something service oriented. I became a paramedic, as I said. And so I was thinking about emergency medicine, maybe going to be a PA or a doctor. Threw in a packet to the FBI, didn't think much of it, didn't think I really had an opportunity or a chance. But I did not understand how veterans preference works. And as a 30% disabled vet under the VA ratings, I was actually offered a job for the FBI in 2015. And I ended up shipping out and joining the Quantico class in June of 2016. And so that's how I got there. It's a circuitous route. I was 35 years old when I went to Quantico. And so I was one of the oldest people in my class. I think there was only one man older than me. So I had a different life perspective, sometimes as much as 10 years more than a lot of my classmates. And I think that set me up for how I ended up not being an FBI agent today.
I hear, wow. So you um just wanted to serve the country?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I went into the Air Force. I don't feel like I guess I didn't feel like I had done enough at that point, and a 4-year obligation is really a short period of time. And I felt like I'd earned a bunch of skills. I'd trained very hard. The U.S. government invested probably close to $1 million worth of training me. And I thought, where can I go and put this skill set to use? You can't use it in the private sector. Being a combat qualified diver and an airborne guy and know how to do land navigation and use explosives, this is not really a civilian type of opportunity. And so I thought maybe if I ended up in a federal law enforcement place where we had some, ability to apply those skill sets at a wider level. And I did use some of them, not most of them, it turns out. You don't actually have a lot of reasons to go jump in and do an amphibious assault when you work as an FBI agent, but it's a cool idea in my head. And I ended up doing, something that was a little bit more nuanced. I ended up doing what's called physical surveillance for a good chunk of the 6 years. I spent 3 years doing that. And for me, that was one of the most fun things about being an FBI agent, is actually watching people. Generally speaking, they're supposed to be bad guys, but it's not always the case. Watching bad guys and kind of lining up the where do they live? How are we going to set up the search warrant? What are the logistics are going to be of going forward and knocking on that door? Can we prove that they live there? Who else is there? How do we do this safely? What's the best way to take them into custody and so on? And do we generate any evidence by watching them? Are we able to see criminal activity afoot, as they say in sort of the constitutional law space? And so that was how I took that skill set and applied it in. And like I said, it felt like I still owed something, since I learned a bunch of things, but I never used them.
So you were never on the ground as an FBI agent.
Oh no, I certainly was. I was never on the ground as an Air Force airman. I never deployed or anything like that, which is, like I said, it always felt like there was kind of a hole in my heart that didn't get filled. And so going to Quantico, I spent the 5 months at the academy. My first field office was in Washington, D.C. I was assigned directly out of Quantico to the counterintelligence division at Washington Field Office, which is right in downtown D.C. And then I did that for 2 years. I found that to be a little bit distasteful. There's a lot of reasons why. And I requested a transfer over to do physical surveillance, where I got to actually look at more criminal targets and some counterterrorism targets, which were jihadis and white supremacists and anybody that sort of fills into that space of what the FBI considers threats to national security.
Well, just quick question. What does the FBI, how does the FBI define a white supremacist?
That's a great question. I'm not 100% sure that I know the answer. I know that people can generate these cases. Some of it is based on sworn ideology. Some of that is based in membership with groups. I think that's a lot of it. And some of it is a loose affiliation as if they have contact with other quote unquote known white supremacists. So this is one of those things in government service, we refer to a thing called the self-licking ice cream cone. And the concept is as ridiculous as it sounds. It's an ice cream cone that licks itself. The purpose of the ice cream cone is it has a tongue and it has ice cream. The tongue licks the ice cream. The ice cream exists for the tongue. It's a circular loop. And in many ways, we generate white supremacy cases because somebody has been identified as a white supremacist. It's kind of like the Matt Walsh problem that he had with what is a woman, right? It's a circular. It's like you can't define it without using it. Well, how do you know he's a white supremacist? Because he believes in white supremacist ideology. And then I guess if you were to nail that down, they believe theoretically under threat of violence that people with white skin, and there's some flexible definition of what that involves, right? That's actually evolved over the years. It's evolved, especially in the last probably 75 years in the United States, because it used to be that Italian people were not thought of as being white, but now they are. And my wife always reminds me of that because she's from New York. So there's this kind of growing definition of what quote unquote white means. And if you believe that that is the superior race and you're willing to sort of enforce that by violence, or if you're willing to just say it very publicly and say that that might cause violence or people might get violent because of your thoughts, we've actually run cases where people were not advocating doing anything about their beliefs, which I think are terrible beliefs, by the way. They're abhorrent. And yet in America, you actually are entitled to have really awful beliefs. That's sort of the brilliance of our country. You have the ability to speak freely. You're free to associate with who you choose. And if you want to be a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist or a white nationalist, and I don't really know the distinction line there, you're actually allowed to do that. And in very recent time, even in my own lifetime, the places like the ACLU would defend your right to be that type of a jerk in this country. And for some reason, we've lost that tolerance in the last 20 years. That may be a failed understanding of the First Amendment. But the FBI has started kind of tramping into that space, along with a lot of the liberal, progressive bias that you see. And it's my suspicion is because they continue to recruit younger and younger people that have a lot of time in academia, and there's a less tolerant academic environment. So the white supremacist definition, it's difficult to really nail it down. And I will tell you this, and I've said it before, it makes a great soundbite, but it actually is very true. There is a far greater demand for white supremacy in the federal law enforcement space than there is supply. And so they have to loop in people that would be called white supremacy adjacent, I suppose. I've had briefings about people like Jordan Peterson and Milo Yiannopoulos in FBI space, where they were talking about them as alt-right and so on in 2017 and 2018, as identifying them as potentially part of the quote unquote threat environment or threat landscape, and knowing that they're out there. Now, I'm not going to tell you that the FBI actually knows what these people are about, because I think they're taking CNN or MSNBC talking points, but they are discussing it. And so that kind of stuff was always concerning to me. And so I felt like my job while working in the government was to be one of those people who pushed back against ridiculous ideas that Jordan Peterson is somehow a threat to anything, or that he should be even mentioned in the same group as people like Richard Spencer, who were, speaking famously at the Charlottesville riot that happened in 2017.
Like the media calls a lot of people far right, white supremacists. I think you've been called far right. I don't know if you ever saw this, but there was a trend on Twitter or X to post a picture of yourself or when you were young and say this is what you're calling a far right white supremacist. I remember I posted a picture of myself with my grandfather, but I caught my grandfather out learning the Talmud. I mean, like, there's a there's a level. I'm not a white supremacist by any shape, form, whatever. But everyone's labeling each other white supremacists. White supremacists, not each other, but they're labeling the right as white supremacists. That's why I asked, how does the FBI define it? Because we're living in an intolerable America. We're not
Yes.
tolerable of anything. And some people on the right are not tolerable of the left, saying you're Nazis. I don't like when we label other people Nazis. What's a
Yeah,
Nazi?
unless you're going to be a Nazi, unless you march around and you believe in the tenets of the National Socialist Party of the Workers' Party of Germany from the 1930s. If that's your ideology, if that is the political position you hold, and you want to identify yourself as a Nazi, and some people do, not nice people, but people are out there in the world, so be it. If you want to ascribe a Nazi label to someone who you disagree with, then I vehemently oppose with that. But I also defend your right to do so. I think that like I said, you are permitted and you are tolerated to be a jerk in this country. And moreover, you mentioned some of the labels. I don't know if I've been called far right or not, but that sounds funny to me. I've had people call me xenophobic. I've had people call me a traitor. I've had people call me bigoted. I've had people call me a white supremacist. I find those to be sort of laughable because they don't hold any gravity. These are people with no authority that have never seen me, that don't know anything about my history or my background. It doesn't hurt my feelings. It's actually comical. It's also social media. Nobody's ever called me that to my face. Nobody would ever even dream of that. And amusingly enough, my surveillance team, which I'm really proud of, it's one of the few things that I did in the Bureau that I was really proud of doing. We recruited an outstanding all-star group of FBI agents, and they included a white agent who spoke fluent Spanish and was married to a woman from El Salvador. We had a Puerto Rican agent whose background was Lebanese and spoke Arabic and English. We had a black agent from New York who was one of my favorite people in the world and was very muscular, and I was very jealous of how ripped he always was, because he would always make fun of us for being less muscular than he was. And he was an outstanding human, a great teammate. We had an Army officer who looked like tactical Jesus, 6'2", 240-pound guy with a big beard and long hair. We had an incredible mix of people. We had an Asian female that was small and light. We had a guy who had Chinese descent and Korean descent. We had all these people on my team, and we all worked together every single day. It had nothing to do with what your color was. What I find in America that we've forgotten is, and maybe this is the point of it, maybe this is the point of the labeling and the throwing this around, there has always been a instinct to divide us. People that want to divide this country will always try to do so. They'll do so with labels or otherwise. But I've never seen color in the way that people do. There are people that are part of my tribe, no doubt, but my tribe is based on values. It's based on values and beliefs and the way that you're willing to articulate the way the world works. And so my friends from the military, different colored skin, totally irrelevant. Different types of last names, whether they be Hispanic or Filipino, or, they come from a black part of LA. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Do we agree that women and children should be protected, that America is a fundamentally good place, and that we're willing to stand up for the rights of speech and the Second Amendment rights of people that we utterly disagree with? If you're willing to put your life on the line for that, then you're my tribe. And so my tribe is actually based on values. It has nothing to do with where you look or, I've got one of my closest buddies who I like to go shoot with, and we haven't been able to connect in a while, but, he was born and raised in Taiwan, and then he came to the United States. So he has Chinese background, and he speaks, I think he speaks Mandarin, and he thinks he speaks Cantonese. And, he's as American as anybody in my life. And he loves guns, and he loves freedom, and he loves America. So, what's more part of my tribe than that? But he was born in a totally different part of the world and grew up until he was 8 or 10 years old there. And so this instinct to divide is based on, I think, trying to shove a wedge that is based on ideology, and it is based on an instinct to keep us from the common definition of what Americans were, which I'm a little bit older than you, but I actually remember when that was pretty common. Everybody walked around, and that was it. It's like we all knew that we were from the same country, and there was no difference there.
Yeah, I don't well, I live in a close-knit community, so I don't like see that, but we're all there. They're the Democrats or the other people are trying to destroy the fundamental of America. United
Yes.
we stand, divided we fall.
Yes.
America, if we continue dividing ourselves, if we continue with this hate, labeling each other things, or just um pushing hate, pushing uh division, America's gonna fall apart.
And that's the goal. But here's the thing that's really interesting. There's a lot of divisiveness online. There's a lot of divisiveness in the media. If you were to listen to what goes on Facebook or on Twitter, which I spend a lot of time on, I know you're there as well. If you were to take that as real life, then of course you would believe that people are factionalized and that they can't be civil to each other and that the worst of humanity is on display. But what I would say is that I interact with people in real life far more frequently in my life than I do on Twitter, even though I'm on Twitter an unhealthy amount of time, I would say. You go meet somebody at the drugstore, you go meet somebody at the hardware store, you go out and you go to church, you go to synagogue, you go to your mosque, and you talk to your neighbors who may or may not agree with you politically. It's sort of irrelevant. They will be polite to you and they will treat you like a human being. That's what they'll do. And that's how people interact with each other. If you go, and we have a little grocery store called HEB, you go to the grocery store and the checkers there may be teenagers and we don't have they may have a nose piercing and purple hair, and they're still polite to my wife who is pregnant, and they understand that children are beautiful. And so there is a far bigger segment of America that understands the similar values than our media and our social media would have you believe. I think the worst instincts come out there. So it's a real simple recommendation that I always make to people, because everyone's always looking like, what do we do about this? How do we fix this? Go meet your neighbors. When I grew up, I knew all my neighbors on every side of the street. And I know probably 6 of my neighbors here, and I've only been here for about 3 months. I've gone and knocked on doors. I've had them come over and knock on my door. I had one of them tell me he's seen me on Fox News, so that's kind of funny. My neighbor right next door to me who just moved out, but we're going to keep in touch with, are immigrants from Kenya, and they're lovely people. They're just absolutely wonderful, and their kid is my children's best friend right now in the state. And so go make friends, introduce your kids to other kids, and make those bonds that when things are difficult and things are tough, that those stand out more than somebody on a news station or some, tweet that says that you're a racist, because they're going to know you as a real person and they'll know that it's false. It's much easier to know that. They can dispel that immediately based on real experience.
So I will say this. On Twitter, when people insult, there's always they would never do it in person.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, I have become friends with a lot of people through Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
I've exchanged numbers with people through Twitter. Twitter can be a good place. There is a lot of hate, but the people would like to have you believe that there's more division than there is.
Yes, I would agree. Let me frame that a little bit. There are 2 ways that you can use social media. And my father actually wrote an entire book about it. The book is called When Did You Stop Being You? In Search of a Personal Brand. And the basics of it look like this. If you are a type of person and you get online and you interact as you would normally with people that are real people, then you will be able to meet people that are the same as you, and you will be able to interact with them. The producer of my podcast, I have never met in person. We talk almost every single day. We spend hours together every single day working on the podcast and getting information out, sharing notes, doing media hits and things like that. We spend an awful lot of time together. We've never physically met in person, but I know he's a good person. I've also interviewed him pretty extensively, and he was on my show and I was on his show. But that's because the brand that I have on social media is the person that I am. It might even be a better person that I am, but not like in a way that I aspire to be and cannot be. On my best days, I am as the person that you see on Twitter. I refuse to get involved in name calling with complete strangers, and I don't generally get involved in name calling with complete strangers in my real life. I will say, bless your heart if you are a lousy congressperson who defames me in front of Congress, because honestly, bless your heart, you are troubled and you are mistaken, and you might be a liar, and that's your problem. That's not my problem. And so as a person who's raised in the Catholic faith and a Christian, it's very big for me to just go, look, it's not for me to judge you. You've got that coming for yourself. I'm going to work on me. You do whatever you do. And if you have something really awful to say to me, then that is going to be your problem. That's a you thing. I learned it from my buddy who's from Long Island, and he always said this: whoever angers you owns you. If you can walk into social media with that attitude, then you will meet real people and you will have real human connections that are beneficial. If you don't let anyone anger you, because by doing so, you give up some of your agency, you allow them to own you a little bit, and they are determining the way that you act, it means you've surrendered something to someone else. And I'm such a contrarian, I won't let anybody own me. You don't get to own me. Like, you just don't have the privilege because you haven't earned that right. The people that can anger me are people that are really, really close to me. And they, generally speaking, don't. So if you walked in with that attitude, then you'll be better off in life. And then you're correct. You will use that tool as it was maybe hopefully designed to really make human connections from afar. And that's great. And that would be a fantastic sort of shift. I just don't think a lot of people are doing it. But if you want to be part of the force for good in the world, go out there and be a good person on social media, whether it be Twitter, Facebook, True Social, you take it, Getter, I don't know all the other platforms. And you can make the world better. You really can. There are. But you can make the world better by being better. Just start it right there.
I know that I personally was raised to always be nice to people. Like when I'm in grocery stores and I bump into someone, oh, I'm sorry, have a wonderful day, only good things.
Yeah.
I got interviewed by a woman, and she told me that, Yossi, you're the only person that said have a good day after the interview was over. I said, what do you mean? That's just basic decency.
Agreed.
I walk out, I see someone, I ask them how they are. I see someone I don't know, I ask how they are. I make eye contact. They're human beings. You want someone to treat you like a human being, you treat them like a human being.
That's correct. They call it the golden rule for a reason. It's not because it brings you gold. It's because it makes everything else make sense. It brings, a golden experience for everybody else. If you can treat people the way that you want to be treated, then you make that small corner of the world better. And we all have the opportunity to do it. It doesn't cost anything. That's the best part, is what you just said was free. And you can make a dramatic impact on people, and they'll remember you because you did that. So what's better than making a dramatically positive impact on someone? I promise you it's better than an impression or an engagement on social media. It's better than a view, a like, or a tweet about you, or a share, or any of these other kind of metrics that people want to go out there and do. Go out there and do something really positive. I actually just shared this the other day. There was a guy in Great Britain. He's a comedian, and he walked around and he has what he calls bespoke compliments. Are you familiar with this concept? So people talk about bespoke suits. These are handmade suits that are made just to fit you. And what he likes to do as part of his channel is he walks around and has someone film him, and he offers very exquisitely specific compliments to that person. And so he sees a guy walking with very long hair, and he's balding, and he's wearing a blazer like you are. And he said, "Sir, you have a genius vibe about you. Artistic legend meets sophisticated corporate raider." And so he says this thing, and the guy smirks and leaves. He sees another guy walking around, and he says, "You're an aquamarine dream in blue jeans," or something like that, because the guy has an aquamarine shirt and blue jeans. And he specifically compliments the man in a way that is acute to them. And it's charming and it's funny. Is it serious? Not necessarily. He walks by a guy that's smoking a hookah, and he says, "You're a human Ibiza sunset." And the guy goes, "All right," who talks like that? But the guy walked away, and he says, when we both walk away, we both felt like we've had a coffee, because it's invigorating to engage a human being in a positive way and also have them receive it and then give it back to you. So that's one of the fun things that you can do. And like I said, it costs nothing. You've already landed on that with your little comment. And I think it's very true. If people would do it, they would make their better little corner of the world, or their corner of the world, a little bit better every day. And we can all do it. We should.
100%. Well, I wanted to bring you on to interview about the FBI, but
there's so many more important things. The FBI is dangerous and scary, but human interactions will actually defeat it, to be fair.
We have to remember that you have to treat human beings like human beings. Don't call them names. Don't call them animals. That's calling them names. Don't treat them wrong. Don't slap them across the face. Don't curse them out behind their backs. Treat others how you want to be treated. It's one of the golden rules of being a Jew. Treat your neighbors like you want to be treated. Some Jews aren't like that, but
certainly, majority, all people have flaws, no doubt.
Majority, you have to be a caring person.
Well, let me add this to what you were just saying, because I think this also makes sense in the statement of the FBI. One of the things that concerned me the most was when I was there, we were asked to test for COVID. This is one of the reasons why I'm not there anymore. We were asked to test for COVID every 72 hours. And one of the experiences that every FBI agent has is we're required to, as part of our graduation requirements for Quantico, attend a full day program that's put on by the ADL, in order to understand the significance of law enforcement's compliance in engaging and enabling the Holocaust in 1930s and 1940s Germany. Okay, because there's a significant requirement for law enforcement buy-in, the people that have local authority, that have guns and badges, and people listen to engage them in order to enact the Holocaust. And that meant a lot to me when I went there. I'd never thought of it that way before, that minor government officials and your state and local law enforcement, your cops and your sheriff's deputies, that they were the people that could have put the kibosh on whether or not there was a Holocaust. They could have stopped it right in its tracks if they didn't buy in, but they followed orders. That's the famous Nuremberg defense. And so that sunk in, and we were told to pay attention to it. And I did. I took it to heart. And I still think it's very important. It's something that I've advocated for. When they started telling every single person that was essentially a pro-life, unvaccinated Christian in the FBI to swab their nose and get on the list, for me, that was the first step, because everyone knows it didn't start with death camps. That's not how the Jews were eliminated in Europe. They started off by rounding up a list of names. And then they went to those people and they said, you must identify yourself in public as well. You must wear a star. You must wear this armband. And then they said, you must go and live in the same place. They moved them into ghettos and they concentrated them. And then, and only then, once we'd had multiple buy-ins, were they able to move people to the point where they were going to start exterminating. And for me, the first step was dehumanizing and saying, you are different than me. It's the process in social psychology. They call it like othering. You're not the same as me. We are others. And so they started doing that. And I saw the FBI do it, and the entire federal service started doing this thing. They said, you are different. You must identify yourself by taking time out of your day and go doing this thing because you're quote unquote unclean or whatever else they wanted to call it. They tried to act like it was a public health issue, but this was a compliance purge. And I objected to that strenuously. And when you start looking at your neighbor as less than or different than you, not human, and we can do it whether you call people MAGAs or maggots, which is a dehumanizing term. You want to call them animals. You want to call them deplorables. This could happen on either side of the aisle, but we're seeing one side do it right now. You are trying to lessen that person and make them less than you and the people that you agree with. That's the difference. That's the cutting people into tribes. And for me, seeing the federal government do it was the single scariest possibility in my life. I looked at that and I didn't see a direct route that it was going to necessarily lead to a genocidal path, but that was certainly one of the options down the road if we continued doing the thing that we were doing. And so for me, that was a no-go. And that was the same for my friends who are other whistleblowers that have come forward to Congress. They looked at it and they all cited their experience at the Holocaust Museum in the same way. And so it spans Christians and Jews and even Muslims. If they look at this, there's a no-go zone where you dehumanize people and you say that they are less than equal to the same human rights. It's also a fundamentally un-American position. So when we saw that and we said no, that made us a problem for a federal government that's looking for compliance. And ultimately, if people can be aware of these things, and a lot of people lost ground in 2020 and 2021, particularly in the Northeast, they abided by a lot of policies that were very, very dangerous. And they got a small break where they can notice it. If you don't notice these things, you will be victims of these things. And so that's one of the messages I've been really marching out there for people. In no way, shape, or form did the people who lost their jobs over COVID, were they treated like the Jews in the Holocaust. That's not my argument. My argument is that the government employees and the police officers and those people that were enforcing those policies actually acted like the Nazis. And for us to be aware of that distinction, you're not claiming victimhood with a historically absolutely decimated group. What we're talking about is those roots live in many people. Jordan Peterson talks about it a lot as well. If you are not aware of your capacity to do evil by simply doing your job, then you are likely to be involved in something that you did not intend.
All right. Thank you so much, Kyle, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, we will have Kyle on to talk about the FBI another time. Hopefully, the show will come back and be back more often. All right, everyone. Kyle, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, people can check us out at Kyle Seraphin or kyleseraphin.com by all means if they want to see what we have to say. And if you like what you're hearing there, by all means, check out our podcast, which is now 5 days a week on Rumble. It's rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. And yeah, we'll do another conversation about the FBI sometime in the future.
All right, guys. Remember, hold everyone accountable and treat other people like people.